Tyler, a newly hired waiter at Grayson's Bistro, was determined to make a strong impression during his first week. The elegant restaurant buzzed with activity as he moved between tables, his eyes constantly scanning the room for opportunities to impress both customers and management. His demeanor towards his co-workers, however, was far from collegial. Tyler's ambition manifested as arrogance, believing that by outshining his peers, he would secure a fast track to promotion. He dismissed advice from more experienced staff, convinced that his approach was superior. As the evening progressed, Tyler's attention was drawn to the entrance. Elijah, a war veteran, stepped into the bistro with an air of quiet dignity. His weathered face and slightly stiff gait spoke of years of service and sacrifice. Elijah chose a table near the window, settling in to enjoy the ambiance of the upscale establishment. As Elijah sat, his mind drifted to memories of his time in service. The challenges he had faced, the bonds forged with fellow soldiers, and the difficult transition back to civilian life all played through his thoughts. The bistro represented a small luxury, a moment of peace in a life that had seen its share of turmoil. Tyler observed Elijah from across the room, his brow furrowing in disapproval. In Tyler's mind, Elijah's appearance didn't align with the bistro's upscale image. Without bothering to learn anything about the new customer, Tyler made a snap judgment based solely on appearance. Driven by his misguided attempt to protect the restaurant's image, Tyler approached Elijah's table. His voice was cold and dismissive as he addressed the veteran. "Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to leave. We can't have you tarnishing the image of our establishment." Elijah looked up, shocked by the blatant disrespect. Other diners nearby turned their heads, sensing the tension in Tyler's words. The veteran opened his mouth to respond, but Tyler cut him off, gesturing towards the door. "Please, sir, don't make this difficult. This isn't the place for you." The scene was set for conflict, with Tyler's prejudice and ambition colliding with Elijah's dignity and right to be treated as an equal. The other patrons watched in stunned silence, the pleasant atmosphere of the bistro shattered by this display of discrimination. Angela, a young executive, had chosen Grayson's Bistro as the venue for an important meeting with her colleagues. They were there to discuss a new diversity initiative for their company. As they settled into their seats, Angela's attention was drawn to the confrontation unfolding across the room. She watched in disbelief as Tyler approached Elijah's table and began speaking to him in a dismissive tone. Angela's colleagues noticed her distraction and followed her gaze. The group fell silent, their planned discussion forgotten as they witnessed the discriminatory scene. Without hesitation, Angela stood up, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. She strode purposefully towards Tyler and Elijah, her voice cutting through the tense atmosphere. "Excuse me," she said firmly, addressing Tyler. "What exactly do you think you're doing?" Tyler turned, startled by the interruption. He stammered, trying to justify his actions, but Angela wasn't having it. "I demand that you apologize to this gentleman immediately," she said, her voice carrying across the now silent restaurant. Other diners began to take notice, conversations halting as attention shifted to the confrontation. Angela's colleagues stood up, moving to support her. The bistro's manager, alerted by the commotion, hurried over in an attempt to defuse the situation. "Ma'am, please," the manager said, his voice strained. "Let's not make a scene. We can discuss this privately." But Angela stood her ground, her eyes flashing with indignation. "No," she replied firmly. "This needs to be addressed here and now. Everyone needs to see how this establishment treats its customers." Her words seemed to break a dam of silence among the other patrons. Suddenly, voices began to rise from other tables. A middle-aged woman spoke up, sharing her own experience of being judged based on her appearance. An elderly man recounted a time when he was denied service due to his age. Each story built upon the last, creating a chorus of shared experiences of discrimination. The manager's face paled as he realized the situation was spiraling out of control. Tyler stood frozen, his earlier confidence evaporating in the face of the growing outrage. Elijah remained seated, his expression a mix of gratitude and discomfort at being the center of attention. As more patrons joined the conversation, the bistro transformed from a place of quiet dining to a forum for open discussion about prejudice and respect. The air crackled with tension, and the energy of long-suppressed frustrations finally finding voice. Angela, emboldened by the support, turned back to Tyler. "Well," she demanded, "we're all waiting for that apology." The entire restaurant held its breath, waiting to see how the young waiter would respond to this public challenge of his actions. Tyler, now the center of attention, felt the weight of dozens of eyes upon him. His earlier confidence had evaporated, replaced by a growing sense of panic. He cleared his throat, attempting to regain control of the situation. "Look, I was just trying to maintain the standards of this establishment," Tyler said, his voice wavering. "We have a certain clientele to cater to, and I was doing my job." His words, intended as a defense, only served to further incense the crowd. Murmurs of disapproval rippled through the bistro. Angela, her eyes flashing with indignation, seized on Tyler's weak justification. "Standards?" she repeated, her voice cutting through the tension. "And what standards would those be? Discrimination? Prejudice? Is that what Grayson's Bistro stands for?" Angela turned to address the room at large, her voice carrying with a natural eloquence that commanded attention. "A true standard of excellence isn't about excluding people," she declared. "It's about creating a space where everyone feels welcome and respected." As she spoke, other diners nodded in agreement. Angela continued, her words gathering momentum. "This bistro, like any public space, should be a place that celebrates diversity. Our differences are what make our community rich and vibrant. By trying to create some artificial standard of uniformity, we lose the very thing that makes us special." Tyler, increasingly uncomfortable, tried to interject, but his words were drowned out by sounds of agreement from the other patrons. The manager, sensing the shift in the room, began to look nervously between Tyler and the crowd. Throughout this exchange, Elijah remained seated at his table, his posture straight and dignified. His eyes, however, betrayed a mix of emotions: hurt at the initial rejection, gratitude for Angela's intervention, and a quiet strength born from years of facing similar situations. As the atmosphere in the bistro grew more charged, customers began sharing their own stories of discrimination faced in various settings. Each account added fuel to the fire, transforming the elegant dining room into a forum for long-suppressed grievances. Tyler, overwhelmed by the turn of events, attempted one last defense. "I was just following what I thought was best for the restaurant," he stammered, his earlier arrogance replaced by visible distress. But his words fell flat in the face of the emotional energy now permeating the room. The pressure on Tyler continued to mount as more and more patrons voiced their support for Elijah and their disgust at the discriminatory treatment they had witnessed. As the situation escalated, it became clear that this night at Grayson's Bistro had become about much more than one instance of discrimination. It had evolved into a catalyst for a larger conversation about respect, dignity, and the true meaning of community. The manager of Grayson's Bistro, a middle-aged man named Robert, watched the scene unfold with growing alarm. He realized that the situation had spiraled far beyond a simple customer complaint. The reputation of the bistro, carefully cultivated over years, was now hanging by a thread. Robert stepped forward, raising his hands in a placating gesture. "Ladies and gentlemen, please," he began, his voice strained. "On behalf of Grayson's Bistro, I want to apologize for this unfortunate incident." He turned to Tyler, who stood rigid with tension. "Tyler," Robert said, his tone firm, "your actions tonight do not reflect the values of this establishment. I'm afraid we're going to have to terminate your employment, effective immediately." A hush fell over the bistro as Robert's words sank in. Then, as if a dam had broken, applause erupted from the gathered patrons. The swift action seemed to satisfy their demand for justice, at least momentarily. Tyler's face drained of color as the reality of his situation hit home. Without a word, he turned and walked stiffly towards the staff area, disappearing from view. As the applause died down, the atmosphere in the bistro shifted. What had been a space of tension and confrontation began to transform into something else entirely. Customers who had been silent observers now turned to their neighbors, engaging in earnest discussions about racism, respect, and social responsibility. At one table, a young couple shared their experiences as immigrants, detailing the subtle and not-so-subtle discrimination they faced daily. Nearby, an elderly woman spoke about the changes she'd seen over her lifetime, both positive and negative. The conversations spread like ripples in a pond, touching on topics that many had been hesitant to discuss in public before. The elegant dining room of Grayson's Bistro had become an impromptu forum for dialogue on some of society's most pressing issues. Amidst this buzz of conversation, Elijah slowly rose from his seat. The veteran's movements were deliberate, drawing the attention of those nearby. As he stood, the conversations gradually quieted, and all eyes turned to him. Elijah cleared his throat, his voice steady as he began to speak. "I've seen a lot in my time," he said, his words carrying easily in the now hushed room. "Served my country, faced enemies abroad, but sometimes the hardest battles are the ones we face right here at home." He paused, his gaze sweeping across the room. "Coming back wasn't easy. A lot of us veterans struggled to fit back into civilian life. We faced judgment, misunderstanding, sometimes outright hostility. But tonight I've seen something different. I've seen people stand up for what's right, even when it's uncomfortable." Elijah's words seemed to resonate with everyone present. As he spoke about the challenges veterans face upon returning home, many listeners nodded in understanding, some wiping away tears. The bistro, which had started the evening as just another upscale restaurant, had been transformed. It was now a space where strangers connected over shared experiences and a common desire for a more just society. As Elijah finished speaking, a sense of unity and purpose filled the room. The night's events had sparked something larger than a single incident of discrimination. It had become a catalyst for change, a moment where a community came together to say that respect and dignity should be afforded to all. As Elijah's words resonated through the bistro, the atmosphere shifted once again. The initial anger and indignation had given way to a collective sense of purpose and understanding. Customers who had been strangers just hours before now turned to each other, eager to share their own experiences and perspectives. Elijah, emboldened by the supportive environment, continued to speak. He delved deeper into the challenges faced by veterans upon their return to civilian life. "Many of us come back changed," he explained, his voice steady but tinged with emotion. "We've seen things, done things that most civilians can't imagine, and sometimes that makes it hard for us to fit in." He spoke of the invisible wounds of war, the PTSD, the depression, the feeling of being out of place in a world that had moved on without them. As he talked, heads nodded in understanding and several patrons wiped away tears. "But it's not just veterans," Elijah continued, his gaze sweeping across the room. "So many groups face prejudice and misunderstanding. Tonight I've heard stories from immigrants, from elderly folks, from people of all backgrounds. We all have our battles to fight." As Elijah spoke, Angela listened intently, her mind racing. She saw an opportunity to turn this moment into something more lasting. When Elijah finished, she stood up, addressing both him and the room at large. "Dad," she said, her voice carrying clearly through the bistro, "your courage tonight and the courage of everyone who's spoken up has shown us something important. We can't let this moment pass without action." Angela turned to face the other patrons. "What if we used this as a starting point? What if we created a campaign right here at Grayson's Bistro to promote diversity and understanding?" Her suggestion was met with murmurs of approval. Customers began to nod, some even clapping in support of the idea. The manager, Robert, who had been listening quietly, stepped forward. "Ms. Angela," he said, his tone respectful, "I think that's an excellent idea. Grayson's Bistro has always strived to be a pillar of the community. We'd be honored to support such an initiative." As the idea took hold, the bistro transformed once again. What had started as a typical evening, then became a scene of confrontation, had now evolved into a space of community and action. Patrons began to exchange contact information, eager to stay involved in the budding campaign. Some customers approached Elijah, sharing their own stories of struggle and resilience. Others gathered around Angela, offering ideas and support for the diversity initiative. The elegant dining room buzzed with energy and purpose. As the night wore on, it became clear that the events at Grayson's Bistro had sparked something larger than anyone could have anticipated. A single act of discrimination had led to a powerful movement of unity and understanding. The patrons left that night not just as satisfied diners, but as members of a community committed to positive change. The following morning, Angela and Elijah met at a local coffee shop to discuss their next steps. The events of the previous night had left them both energized and determined to turn the momentum into concrete action. "I've already reached out to Robert, the manager at Grayson's," Angela said, her fingers tapping rapidly on her tablet. "He's agreed to meet with us this afternoon to discuss implementing the diversity campaign." Elijah nodded, a mix of pride and concern on his face. "That's great, sweetheart. But are you sure you want to take this on? It's a big commitment." Angela's eyes shone with determination. "Dad, after what happened last night, how can I not? We have a real chance to make a difference here." As they continued to plan across town, Tyler was facing the harsh reality of his actions. He sat in his small apartment staring at his phone, which had been buzzing non-stop with messages from friends and family who had heard about the incident. Tyler's roommate, Chris, emerged from his bedroom, eyeing Tyler with a mixture of disappointment and concern. "Man, what were you thinking?" Chris asked, shaking his head. Tyler looked up, his face a mask of confusion and regret. "I don't know," he admitted. "I thought I was doing the right thing for the restaurant, but now—" He trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. Chris sat down across from Tyler. "Look," he said, his tone serious. "What you did was wrong, no question about it. But now you've got a choice to make. You can either wallow in self-pity, or you can use this as a wake-up call to examine your attitudes and make some changes." Tyler nodded slowly, the weight of his actions finally sinking in. "I don't even know where to start," he said quietly. Chris stood up, grabbing his laptop. "Let's start by finding some resources on unconscious bias and diversity training, and maybe look into volunteer opportunities where you can interact with different communities. It's not going to be easy, but it's necessary." As Tyler and Chris began their research, a small spark of hope ignited in Tyler. He realized that while he couldn't undo his actions, he could use this experience as a catalyst for personal growth and change. Back at the coffee shop, Angela and Elijah were putting the finishing touches on their proposal for Grayson's Bistro. They had outlined a comprehensive plan that included staff training, community outreach events, and a revamped hiring policy to ensure a more diverse workforce. As they gathered their things to head to the meeting with Robert, Elijah placed a hand on Angela's shoulder. "I'm proud of you, you know," he said softly. "You're turning a negative experience into something positive. That takes real strength." Angela smiled, feeling a mix of excitement and nervousness about the task ahead. As they left the coffee shop, both father and daughter felt a sense of purpose. They knew that the road ahead would be challenging, but they were ready to face it together, determined to create lasting change in their community. The meeting with Robert at Grayson's Bistro exceeded Angela and Elijah's expectations. As they settled into a quiet corner of the restaurant, Robert's demeanor was one of genuine interest and commitment. "I've been doing a lot of thinking since last night," Robert began, his usual confident manner tempered by humility. "What happened here was unacceptable, and it's clear we need to make significant changes." Angela nodded, pulling out her tablet. "We've prepared a comprehensive proposal," she said, her voice steady and professional. "It covers everything from staff training to community engagement initiatives." For the next hour, they delved into the details of the plan. Robert listened attentively, asking thoughtful questions and offering insights from his years of experience in the restaurant industry. "I especially like your idea of hosting regular diversity dinner events," Robert said, gesturing to one section of the proposal. "We could invite speakers from various backgrounds to share their experiences, while our guests enjoy a meal inspired by different cultures." Elijah leaned forward, adding his perspective. "And don't forget about accessibility," he said. "Many of my fellow veterans struggle with physical disabilities. Making sure the bistro is fully accessible would send a powerful message." As the meeting progressed, it became clear that this initiative was going to be more than just a response to a single incident. It was evolving into a complete reimagining of Grayson's Bistro's role in the community. By the end of the discussion, Robert was fully on board. "Let's do this," he said, extending his hand to Angela and Elijah. "Grayson's Bistro will become a model for inclusivity and diversity in the restaurant industry." Energized by the successful meeting, Angela and Elijah left the bistro and immediately began putting their plans into action. They decided to organize a special event to launch the new initiative, bringing together community leaders, local media, and regular patrons of the bistro. Angela reached out to her network, securing commitments from several prominent figures to speak at the event. Elijah contacted local veterans groups, ensuring that their voices would be well represented. As word of the event spread, interest began to grow. Local news outlets picked up the story, intrigued by how a single act of discrimination had sparked such a positive community response. One afternoon, as Angela was finalizing the event details, she received a call from a journalist at the city's major newspaper. "We'd like to do a feature story on your initiative," the journalist said. "It's not often we see a negative incident turned around so quickly into a force for positive change." Angela agreed to the interview, recognizing the opportunity to spread their message even further. As she hung up the phone, she felt a mix of excitement and trepidation. The event was taking on a life of its own, growing beyond anything she had initially imagined. That evening, as Angela shared the news with Elijah over dinner, she couldn't help but reflect on how much had changed in just a few days. "Dad," she said, a hint of wonder in her voice, "can you believe how far this has come? From that terrible moment in the bistro to this?" Elijah reached across the table, squeezing his daughter's hand. "It just goes to show," he said, his voice warm with pride, "that when people come together with a common purpose, real change is possible." As they continued their meal, both father and daughter felt a sense of anticipation building. The upcoming event wasn't just a launch for a new initiative, it was the start of a movement that had the potential to transform their community. The day of the event arrived and Grayson's Bistro was abuzz with activity. The staff, newly trained in diversity and inclusion practices, moved efficiently to prepare the space. Angela and Elijah arrived early, their nervous energy palpable as they oversaw the final preparations. Outside the bistro, a small crowd had already begun to gather. Local residents, curious about the transformation they'd heard about, mingled with invited guests and media representatives. The atmosphere was one of anticipation and hope. As the doors opened and people began to file in, Angela scanned the crowd, her heart swelling with pride at the diverse faces she saw. Young and old, people of various ethnicities and backgrounds, all coming together in a space that just days ago had been the site of discrimination. Unbeknownst to Angela and Elijah, Tyler had also arrived. He stood across the street, watching the scene unfold, torn between shame and a desire to make amends. He had spent the past few days in deep reflection, realizing the depth of his misconceptions and the harm they had caused. Inside, Robert took to the small stage that had been set up. "Welcome, everyone," he began, his voice carrying across the now packed bistro. "We're here today not just to launch a new initiative, but to recommit ourselves to the values of respect, dignity, and inclusivity." As Robert spoke, introducing the evening's speakers, Angela felt a tap on her shoulder. She turned to see one of the staff members looking concerned. "Ms. Angela," the young woman whispered, "there's someone outside asking to speak with you. It's Tyler." Angela's breath caught in her throat. She glanced at her father, who had overheard the exchange. Elijah nodded, encouraging her to go. "I'll hold down the fort here," he said softly. With a deep breath, Angela made her way to the bistro's entrance. There, looking nervous and out of place, stood Tyler. I don't know if I should be here," he began, his voice barely above a whisper. "But I needed to apologize. To you, to your father, to everyone." Angela studied Tyler's face, seeing genuine remorse in his eyes. "Tyler," she said, her tone firm but not unkind, "what you did was wrong. But the fact that you're here, that you want to make amends, that's important." As they talked, Tyler explained the soul-searching he'd done over the past few days. He spoke of the diversity training courses he'd enrolled in, the volunteer work he'd started with veteran groups. "I know it doesn't erase what I did," he said, "but I'm committed to doing better, to being better." Inside, Elijah had taken the stage. His powerful speech about his experiences as a veteran and the discrimination he'd faced moved many in the audience to tears. As he spoke about the importance of understanding and acceptance, a ripple of murmurs spread through the crowd. Angela and Tyler had re-entered the bistro, standing at the back of the room. Seeing them, Elijah paused for a moment, then made a decision that would change the course of the evening. "We talk about second chances," Elijah said, his voice strong and clear. "About growth and learning. Well, sometimes those aren't just words." He gestured towards Tyler. "This young man made a mistake, a big one, but he's here tonight, ready to learn, ready to change. And isn't that what this is all about?" A hush fell over the room as all eyes turned to Tyler. In that moment, the true power of the initiative became clear. It wasn't just about pointing out wrongs, but about creating a space for growth, understanding, and redemption. As the event continued, with speakers sharing their experiences and visions for a more inclusive community, the atmosphere in Grayson's bistro was electric. What had started as a response to discrimination had become a powerful movement for change, touching lives in ways no one could have predicted. As the event progressed, the atmosphere in Grayson's bistro continued to evolve. The initial tension surrounding Tyler's presence gradually gave way to a sense of curiosity and, for some, cautious acceptance. Tyler, still standing at the back of the room, felt the weight of dozens of eyes upon him. Gathering his courage, Tyler stepped forward. "Excuse me," he said, his voice trembling slightly. "May I say something?" Angela and Elijah exchanged glances, then nodded. Robert, sensing the significance of the moment, gestured for Tyler to take the stage. As Tyler made his way to the front, a hushed murmur rippled through the crowd. He stood before the microphone, took a deep breath, and began to speak. "I'm the last person who should be standing here," Tyler started, his voice gaining strength as he continued. "A few days ago, I made a terrible mistake. I let my prejudices and misconceptions guide my actions, and in doing so, I hurt people and betrayed the values of respect and dignity that should be at the core of any community." He paused, his eyes scanning the room before settling on Elijah. "Sir," he said, addressing the veteran directly, "I can't undo what I did, but I want you to know how deeply sorry I am. My actions were inexcusable, and they've forced me to confront some ugly truths about myself." Tyler then turned to address the entire audience. "Since that night, I've been on a journey of self-reflection, education, and growth. I've enrolled in diversity training courses, started volunteering with veteran groups, and have been working to understand and challenge my own biases." As Tyler spoke, the crowd listened intently. Some faces showed skepticism, others empathy. Angela, watching from the side, felt a complex mix of emotions: pride in the initiative's impact, hope for genuine change, and a lingering caution born from the hurt of that initial encounter. "I know that words are easy," Tyler continued, And that real change comes through sustained action. I'm here tonight not to ask for forgiveness, but to commit myself to the hard work of becoming a better person and a positive force in this community. As Tyler finished speaking, a moment of silence fell over the bistro. Then slowly a smattering of applause began, growing in volume. It wasn't the enthusiastic ovation of full acceptance, but rather an acknowledgement of the difficulty and importance of the journey Tyler had embarked upon. Elijah stood up and made his way to the stage. He stood face to face with Tyler, studying the young man's expression. Then, in a gesture that would be remembered long after the event, Elijah extended his hand. "It takes courage to admit when you're wrong," Elijah said, his voice carrying across the now silent room. "And it takes even more courage to commit to changing. This right here is what our initiative is all about. Not just calling out wrongs, but creating space for growth, understanding, and yes, even redemption." As Tyler and Elijah shook hands, the bistro erupted in applause. The moment crystallized the true spirit of the diversity initiative. Not just a rejection of discrimination, but an active embrace of growth, learning, and community. Angela, watching from the side, felt tears welling in her eyes. The event had taken an unexpected turn, but in doing so it had demonstrated the real-world impact of the values they were promoting. As the applause died down, Robert took the stage once more. "This," he said, gesturing to Tyler and Elijah, "this is what Grayson's Bistro will stand for from this day forward. A place where mistakes can be acknowledged, where growth is supported, and where our community can come together to build understanding." The energy in the room was palpable. What had started as a response to a single act of discrimination had evolved into a powerful demonstration of community, growth, and the potential for positive change. As the event drew to a close, the atmosphere in Grayson's Bistro was markedly different from when it had begun. The initial tension had given way to a sense of unity and purpose. Guests lingered, engaged in earnest conversations about the night's events and the path forward. A group of patrons approached Tyler, who stood nervously at the edge of the room. Among them was a middle-aged woman who introduced herself as Sandra, a local business owner. "What you did tonight wasn't easy," she said, her tone sincere. "It takes real guts to stand up and admit you were wrong, especially in front of a crowd like this." Tyler nodded, a mix of relief and lingering shame on his face. "I'm just trying to do better," he replied softly. "I know I have a long way to go." As the group continued to talk with Tyler, offering words of encouragement and sharing their own experiences with prejudice and growth, Angela and Elijah watched from across the room. "I didn't see that coming," Angela admitted to her father, a hint of wonder in her voice. "When I saw Tyler outside, I thought—" Elijah squeezed his daughter's shoulder. "Sometimes people can surprise you," he said. "What matters is that we've created a space where this kind of growth and dialogue can happen." Their conversation was interrupted by the approach of a well-dressed man who introduced himself as Marcus Thornton, a prominent local investor. "Ms. Angela, Mr. Elijah," he began, his tone serious, "I must say I'm quite concerned about the direction Grayson's Bistro is taking." Angela and Elijah exchanged glances, bracing themselves for what was to come. Marcus continued, his voice low but firm. "The fact that this establishment employed someone like Tyler in the first place is troubling. And now to give him a platform? I'm not sure I can continue to support a business that takes such risks with its reputation." Before Angela could respond, Robert, who had overheard the conversation, stepped in. "Mr. Thornton," he said, his voice steady, "I understand your concerns, but what you saw tonight, that's exactly what we're aiming for. Growth, understanding, and second chances. That's the reputation we want for Grayson's Bistro." Marcus shook his head, unmoved. "I'm sorry, but I can't agree. I'll be withdrawing my investment effective immediately." With that, he turned and left, leaving a stunned silence in his wake. As the reality of Marcus's decision sank in, Robert's face fell. The loss of such a significant investor could have serious implications for the bistro's future. Angela, sensing the shift in mood, quickly gathered her team. "Okay, we need to regroup," she said, her voice low but determined. "This setback doesn't change our mission. If anything, it makes it more important." Elijah nodded in agreement. "We knew this wouldn't be easy," he added, "but we're doing the right thing, and that's what matters." As the last of the guests departed, the core team, Angela, Elijah, Robert, and now Tyler, gathered to discuss their next steps. The loss of Marcus's investment was a blow, but it had also crystallized their resolve. "We'll find other investors," Robert said, his initial dismay replaced by determination. "Ones who understand and support our vision." Tyler, who had been quiet, spoke up. "I want to help," he said. "I know I can't work here again, but maybe I can share my story, show people the impact this initiative can have." Angela nodded, a small smile forming. "That's a great idea, Tyler. Your journey could be powerful testimony to what we're trying to achieve." As they continued to plan, it became clear that the night's events, both positive and negative, had solidified their commitment to the cause. Grayson's Bistro was no longer just a restaurant. It had become a symbol of change, a place where difficult conversations could happen, and where growth was not just encouraged, but celebrated. The road ahead would be challenging, but as Angela looked around at the determined faces of her team, she felt a surge of hope. They had turned a moment of shame into a victory for justice, and in doing so, had set the stage for lasting change in their community. As they left the bistro that night, each member of the team carried with them a renewed sense of purpose. The true work was just beginning, but they were ready to face it together, united in their vision of a more inclusive and understanding world.